At the far edge of a valley shaped like a cupped hand, an old spruce leaned over a brook that slept beneath a lace of ice. On the highest bough, where the needles caught starlight, lived an owl named Orin. He was small for an owl, with feathers the color of smoke and snow, and eyes that kept the night like gentle lanterns. He listened more than he spoke. He watched the way clouds gathered around a frozen peak, the mountain that wore winter like a crown. When he listened long enough, he could hear the mountain breathe. A soft wind passed through the valley and made the spruce whisper. The valley folk called Orin the Quiet One, and they trusted him when paths were dim. A fox with winter-red fur trotted by each dusk and left news at the roots. A hare with pale ears beat snow from the berry canes. A young ibex, steady on its small hooves, climbed the low shoulders of the ridges and counted the stars out loud. They all loved the brook. It carried songs from hidden springs to the reed beds where ducklings learned to paddle, and to the alder shade where the trout flicked their tails like silver leaves. When the brook was lively, the valley was lively. When the brook grew slow, the valley listened for trouble. This year, the ice came early. White began at the grasses and walked to the stones. The brook fell quiet under a shell so clear the moon could see itself. Orin watched the frozen peak gather more cold, as if frost were a story the mountain kept telling itself. He felt the hush grow heavy. The fox found no mice near the sleeping water. The hare pressed his nose to the ice and blinked. Even the ibex frowned as it tasted the wind and found it thin. Orin ruffled his feathers and closed one eye, then the other. His heart beat fast with hope that the mountain could be asked to loosen its hold. On a morning when sunlight stroked the leaves of the few firs that still kept their green, Orin flew to the spruce tip before dawn. He watched night drain from the sky like ink. The owl cleared his small throat and spoke to the valley in his quiet way. He said there must be a path to the spring within the mountain. The frozen peak was not only stone and snow, it was a keeper of doors. If one could find the door of warm breath and song, the brook would wake, and the valley would stir. The fox steadied his ears. The hare pressed closer. The ibex bowed, because respect is light in winter. Orin set out at twilight, when the world rests between questions. The fox walked beside him until the drifts narrowed the path. The hare broke trail until his legs shook. The ibex tested a ledge and nodded to show it would hold. They climbed until trees were memories. They climbed until the valley was a folded blanket below. Wind braided Orin's feathers and teased his courage, but he tucked the valley under his heart like a warm stone. When the night thickened, he perched on a shoulder of ice and listened. A soft wind passed again, thin and careful, carrying a low hum as if a giant kettle simmered deep inside the mountain.
They met a raven near a cornice that bent like a silver horn. The raven knew the names of storms and the moods of the sky. He told them the frozen peak was wrapped in 3 bindings. The first binding was silence. It kept every drop from speaking. The second binding was shadow. It hid the path even from eyes that glowed in the night. The third binding was pride. It told the mountain it never needed help. The raven croaked and fluffed his feathers. He said bindings love to be undone by small hands that work together. Orin thanked him, because thanks is a tool a traveler must carry. Silence met them before the caves. It hung like a glass curtain. Not even Orin's wings made sound. The fox opened his mouth and forgot what barking felt like. The hare stamped and heard nothing. The ibex scraped his hoof and heard no grit speak back. Orin remembered the reed beds and the way frogs once kept time.
He closed his eyes and thought of every voice in the valley. He thought of the old friend Spruce, and the ducklings, and the gentle trout, and the tiny spiders who stitched frost webs by the barn. He began to move his wingtips in a patient rhythm. The fox watched and tapped the ice with his tail. The hare breathed to that beat. The ibex shifted his weight in time. Together they made a music too quiet to hear, yet clear enough to be felt. Silence, surprised, softened at the edge. It could not swallow what was not quite sound and not quite stillness. It had no teeth for that kind of courage. The glass curtain became mist, and then became nothing. The fox grinned, the hare lifted his ears, the ibex laughed a little, which sounded like pebbles rolling kindly. Orin bowed to his friends. His heart beat fast with hope again. The first binding had loosened, not by shouting, but by a gentle joining. The path ahead glowed with the silver taste of new air. Next came shadow. The sky slipped a glove over the moon, and the world forgot its shapes. The cornices became cliffs, the ledges became guesses, and the cave mouths went dark as closed eyes. Orin knew the night well, but this night was heavier, as if someone had stitched extra hours into it. The fox's whiskers tested the cold. The hare shivered. The ibex moved slow. Orin thought of fireflies in summer meadows and of small candles held by small hands. He asked each friend to remember a warm sight. The fox brought back white berries glowing on a thorn. The hare brought back a nest like a bowl of gold grass. The ibex brought back the valley lanterns at harvest when neighbors sing. They tried to hold those pictures like torches. The darkness bent around them and smiled a little. Shadow liked to see brave ones squint and doubt. Orin steadied his breathing and listened again. Somewhere inside that velvet black, water talked to itself. It sounded like a story just learning how to begin. Orin told his friends to lay their warm pictures upon the cold air with their words. The fox described the berry glow. The hare described the golden nest. The ibex described the lanterns and the songs. Orin added the moon when it cradles the wheat. Their breath made clouds. Their words shared light. The gloves slipped from the moon's face. Shadow grew thinner, for it could not feed on memories that were offered instead of hoarded. They reached the first cave. Its mouth was ringed with icicles like organ pipes. Orin perched on one and looked into the throat of the mountain. The air was warmer by a feather, which was enough. A drip fell, the size of a tear. It hit the floor and sang a note. The fox wagged his tail slow, and the hare leaned in. The ibex bowed again, because respect keeps ladders steady. Orin followed the drip trail and bowed to the rock. He felt the mountain listen. He remembered the raven's third word, pride. Pride did not shout here. It wore stillness like a cloak. It told the mountain it could keep its spring without help. It told the mountain it was whole, even as the valley below thinned and sighed. Orin felt small, smaller than a feather under snow. He could not pull that cloak away. He could not argue with stone. He closed his eyes and asked for an old friend. The spruce seemed to step into his memory and stand beside him. It had fed owls with shelter and squirrels with cones. It had held up the sky on mornings when clouds remembered kindness. Orin thought of giving, not taking. He dipped his beak to the ice and offered the mountain a story. He told of a little duckling that once lost the current and found it again when friends swam near. He told of a spider who rebuilt her web after the wind tore it, stitch by patient stitch. He told of a boy who came to the brook with a wooden boat and learned to set it free instead of clutching it. He told these in a voice that did not try to be large. The fox added a tale of berries shared. The hare added a tale of burrows widened to fit a neighbor. The ibex added a tale of ledges saved for the small. Pride listened and forgot its own name. It unpinned the cloak and set it down. Something inside the mountains sighed. The air lifted, the icicles trembled and rang as if 1,000 tiny bells hung in a thawing church.
A seam of blue opened in the cave floor like an eye. Warm breath rose from below, shy and sure. Orin leaned over and felt that breath touch his face like a friend's hand. A soft wind passed along the tunnel and carried the scent of stone made clean by water. The fox danced, the hare hopped, the ibex set his small hooves and looked toward the valley with bright eyes. Orin let his heart rest a moment. Then he spoke to the spring as if to a child who had fallen asleep during a story. He told it about the reed beds waiting. He told it about trout that needed to flick their tails like silver leaves again. He told it about ducklings learning courage by learning to float. He told it about roots that sip and grow and hold the hills together. He told it about neighbors who sing when buckets fill. The spring listened. It did not burst forth, it widened one slow breath at a time. A thread of water woke and found the seam. It ran along the cave floor and tasted the sun by memory. It called another thread, then another. Orin and his friends followed as the threads braided. The mountain opened small doors. Some were no larger than a paw print. Some were no larger than a falling leaf. The water knew them all. It learned old shapes. It remembered the long slide under stone, the moss touch, the leaf shade. The threads found one another and made a brook again. Not a sleeping glass, but a moving thing. Orin's heart beat fast with hope, and he let the beat slow to kindness. He had learned that joy, like water, finds the path you open by listening.
They guided the newborn trickle out of the cave and down the ribs of the frozen peak. Sometimes the wind pushed back. Sometimes the cold tried to close the eyelids of the stones. The fox trotted ahead and pressed his warm pads where the water might hesitate. The hare brushed snow aside with his belly like a small shovel. The ibex stood sure on ledges and made steps where the trickle could leap. Orin flew low, steadying the newborn song with quiet words. Sunlight stroked the leaves of the stunted firs that clung to high shelves. Even that small green welcomed the sound, and the sound grew braver. At last, the brook saw the valley. It remembered the old friend spruce and hurried. The ice on the valley floor listened to the footsteps of joy and cracked into bright shapes. Ducklings woke in their dreams and paddled. Trout made the old silver patterns. The fox laughed, which looks like a smile that forgot its shyness. The hare drummed a soft thank you on the bank. The ibex stood in the first shallow pool and bowed once more. Orin perched on his bough and let his eyes rest on everything water touched. The valley folk gathered. They smelled spring under winter and could not keep from smiling. The beaver checked his dam and nodded with respect. The muskrat hummed. A child from the farm walked down in a red cap and held a small boat made of bark. He set it on the water and did not chase it when it sailed away. He learned again that letting go is a way to love. The old friend spruce lifted a limb and brushed Orin's wing. A soft wind passed through the needles. It sounded like promise. News of the waking brook climbed the ridges and reached the raven. He laughed a black, bright laugh and kept an eye on clouds that were learning gentleness. He told the story to the wind who carried it to other peaks. Other mountains listened to the way a small owl, a fox, a hare, and an ibex had learned to move like one thought. Pride, in other rocks, made a note to rest sometimes. Shadow, in other ledges, learned to thin when memories were shared. Silence, in other caves, learned to enjoy the music of patient hearts. Winter did not end that day. It never does. But the valley learned what to do when thick days tried to become walls. Orin ran his feathers through the cool air and tasted pine. He saw the fox teaching pups how to pause at the water and drink in quiet. He saw the hare guiding little ones to the safest crossing stones. He saw the ibex leading a small caravan of goats along the ledges, hooves soft, voices softer. He saw neighbors practicing the rhythm that had opened the first door, because a valley can keep a beat with its living. Not all days were easy.
There came a storm that wrapped the ridge in white ropes and rattled the alder branches. The brook slowed again and whispered smaller. Orin felt the old worry walk across his chest. He perched in the spruce and listened to the storm's voice. It did not sound cruel. It sounded tired. He remembered the raven's counsel. Bindings love to be undone by small hands working together. Orin glided to the riverbank and tapped a rhythm on the trunk with his beak. The fox tapped with his tail. The hare beat the snow with his feet. The ibex clicked his hooves like pebbles. Others came and added their careful sounds. No one shouted. No one tried to be the loudest. The storm sighed and stepped aside so it could catch its breath. As the days unrolled, the mountain kept its crown, but it also kept a new habit. It let the spring carry stories down. The water spoke even when the air still held teeth. It carried comfort to burrows. It polished stones to a friendly shine. It taught the ducklings courage and the trout patience. It kept the child company when he sat with a fishing rod and counted the floating seeds. In that soft company, the child learned to put his small boat in once, and only once, and be glad. The old friend's spruce grew a little more toward the sun because the roots drink deeply again. Orin rested when he could. He slept one eye open, as owls do, but he also learned to sleep both eyes closed on the safest nights. He had carried worry like a pebble under his tongue. He spat it out and watched it sink in the clear shallows where it could be rounder. He sat with the fox on the bank. The two of them watched cloud islands sail and turn into sheep and castles and bread. They watched the hare teach little ones to read the drift lines. They watched the ibex set his hooves in places where others would follow. They watched the valley become itself again. Sometimes Orin flew back to the cave to thank the mountain. He did not go to command. He went to listen. In the cool air, he told the spring a new story each time. He told how a mouse survived because a berry lasted longer than a quarrel. He told how a spider shared a corner with a moth, and both learned peace. He told how the child in the red cap grew taller and started to carve boats he would give away. The spring liked stories. It answered with the calm clapping of water on stone. On a blue evening, when the first stars wrote soft names above the ridge, Orin gathered his friends where the brook widened into a small, silver pond. The ducklings had grown and were learning to leave wake lines like writing. The trout nosed the surface and made small rings. The child sat nearby with his chin in his hands and listened as if he had been waiting for this very moment. Orin lifted his head and his eyes carried the pond and the stars together. He spoke to the valley, but also to the brave one in every heart. He said a mountain can be the largest thing you see, and still it can listen to the smallest hands and the softest voices. He said a door can be locked by silence, shadow, and pride, but the key might be a story laid down like a warm stone. He said the loudest courage is not always useful, but the kind that keeps time with friends can melt a winter's grip. He said a soft wind passed through the valley every night, even when we are too busy to feel it. He said sunlight stroked the leaves every morning, even when clouds borrowed the sky. The child nodded, because children can understand long things with short hearts. The fox rested his chin on his paws and closed one eye, then the other. The hare sat very still, which is its secret strength. The ibex bowed because gratitude keeps hills from sliding. Orin folded his feathers so they would hold the warmth a little longer. The pond breathed, the valley breathed, the frozen peak breathed. The three bindings had learned new names. Silence had learned to be rest. Shadow had learned to be shade. Pride had learned to be dignity. The mountain kept its crown, but now it felt like a promise instead of a guard. When spring finally walked up from the south in green shoes, she found a valley already awake.
She found neighbors who knew each other's beats and breaths. She found a brook that did not wait to be told. She found a mountain that nodded to her and saved a cool room for summer when it would be needed. She found an owl who liked to perch with one ear tilted toward the smallest voices. She found a fox who taught pups to drink joy in small sips. She found a hare who taught little ones to pause before leaping so they could notice who needed help. She found an ibex who never stopped bowing to the ladders that held everyone. She smiled because spring does not bring kindness, it looks for it. That night the stars were so many that the pond could not hold them all. They spilled onto the bank and pretended to be fireflies. Orin laughed without sound, which is a thing some laughs can do. The child in the red cap fell asleep with his cheek on his sleeve, and his boat floated in the reeds and waited for morning. The fox curled beside him and kept the night for him. The hare lay under the alder and dreamed of gentle drums. The ibex stood guard on a high rock and drew a line across the sky with his small horns, a line that meant safe. The old friend Spruce held up the moon a little longer. In the hush that comes before dawn, Orin spoke one more time to the frozen peak. He thanked it for its doors and its lessons. He promised to listen when the mountain needed stillness or song. He promised to carry stories like warm stones and pass them to small hands. He promised to keep his courage quiet and his kindness busy. A soft wind passed and answered him. Sunlight stroked the leaves at the edge of the pond. The brook took a breath, then another. It went on as true things do, making a path where winter and hearts agreed to let it through.